journey. So today we are going to be talking about grace. We are on our quest journey this year. We only have one more week left. Next week, we are going to do the completion of our journey. We're going to talk a little bit about what we have learned on our quest journey. But for today, we're talking about grace. And the Jafalas remind us that during this year-long spiritual journey, we've discovered many practical spiritual principles together. The law of mind action, forgiveness, prosperity, and so much more. These simple, practical, spiritual principles that we've been talking about all year work. They work. But not as simple as the fact that we have to work with them. Being on a path of spiritual unfoldment, of coming closer to God, takes a willingness on our part. It takes dedication, and without question, it requires some retraining for most of us. The principles themselves are simple to understand and simple in the way that they function, but sometimes they are not always as easy for us to do. That's why we call this journey a spiritual journey, because it's a practice. And we do our best to stay on the path. And we just keep bringing ourselves back to center whenever we find that we have wandered off the path yet again, because we do that. The goal is not to do it perfectly. Rather, the goal is to come home to our Creator, to be united, Creator with created, to know the truth of our origin, that we are beloved children of a divine parent who conceived us in unconditional love. We are all divine beings in the eyes of God, and we continue climbing back to whatever path we need to be on when we discover that we have taken a detour somewhere we may not want to be. Richard and Mary Alice Jafala tell us in this chapter that grace is the gift. Grace is the gift. They say that the grace of God is ours simply because we are children of God. We don't have to earn it. We don't have to do anything to prove ourselves worthy of having grace. It comes to us unconditionally. It comes as part of the package of being a human creation, of a divine parent who loves and wants for us only our highest good and our greatest joys. Unity's co-founder, Charles Fillmore, in one of his sermons reminds us that we do not have a tricky God. We don't have a tricky God that is changeable and fickle, but a God of law and order, dependable and consistent, the immovable one, the unchanging principle upon which we can rely. And this is the kind of God we desire, of course. A vengeful God would give us that which we do not want. An undependable God would waver in how our prayers were answered. And a tricky God would withhold grace one moment and offer it the next. Perhaps that may sound like some of the gods we came to know in our childhood. Now we know better thanks to Unity's teachings. Grace is ours simply because we are children of God, and God loves us. Grace can be considered love in action, but it is not love as we know it and express it as human affection. It's deeper than that. Divine love coming to us through grace is eternal and unchanging. It is the principle of oneness, connection, and unity. It radiates throughout the universe equally. And divine love is available to every one of us because God has no favorites. Grace is ours even when we act out of character, even when we make mistakes, even when we do not live up to our full potential. Grace is ours because as children of the divine, we deserve the best, and we have the best available to us even when we cannot see it. The song Amazing Grace has these words in it. I once was blind, but now I see. Even when we cannot see our spiritual wholeness, prosperity, or worthiness, all of that is still available to us. Why? Because God is love, and God cannot withhold our good. God is divine energy, always expressing as goodness and love. The acronym that came to me for grace, some of you may want to write this down, is God responding as compassionate energy. Grace is God responding as compassionate energy. That's grace. God gives because it's God's nature to give. It is up to us whether or not we are willing to receive it. We have been given the gift of free will. We cannot beg, borrow, or buy grace. We cannot plead for it, and we cannot earn it. But we do have the power to refuse to see it or to accept the gift when it presents in our lives. God gives equally to all of us, but it's our response to the free gifts of God which allows blessings to flow into our lives. When we are willing to recognize, accept, and acknowledge God's love, our oneness with absolute good, that's when we experience God's grace. A perfect example of grace is given in the story of the prodigal son. Luke chapter 15, verses 11 to 32. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the property that belongs to me." So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and traveled to a distant country. And there he squandered his property in desolate living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to the fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? And here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion, and he ran to him and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and has been found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the slaves and asked, what was going on. And he replied, "Your brother has come and your father has killed the fatted calf because he got him back safe and sound." Then this elder son became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, "Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and never have I disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I may celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him." Then the father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and has been found." So let's look at this story metaphysically for a moment. The characters in the story are the father, the younger son, and the eldest son. The father, of course, represents God. The younger son represents that part of us that is spiritually unaware or underdeveloped. The elder son is our ego. And our inheritance as children of God is our free will. We have all been given the power of free will to take God's riches, our gifts, and live with them as we want. How many of us have looked outside ourselves for happiness, as the prodigal son did? How many of us have taken the gifts that we have been given and squandered them? And I'll just bet that one or two of us in the room have run away to the far country as we tried to find love in all the wrong places. Perhaps we have come to the realization that we are on a negative or even self-destructive path. And we have turned back toward home once more, just as the prodigal son did. What we learn during such times is that although we may be feeling ashamed or embarrassed, although we may be unable to believe that we are acceptable or deserving of good, God knows our worthiness. And as soon as we turn back to God, God runs out to meet us, just as the father and the prodigal son did. The father in the story could just have stood there with his arms crossed, scowling, waiting to say, "I told you so." But he didn't do that to his returning son. He ran to meet him. He ordered him a robe and a ring and sandals for his feet. Metaphysically, a robe is our essence of individuality, that which clothes us. The sandals represent understanding, since our feet stand under us. And the ring is a symbol of holiness, perfection, and eternity. The human father in the story raced out to meet his returning child, eager to clothe him in the essence of his individuality with profound understanding and eternal love. Great metaphysics in that story. There's more. I'll share it another time. Our divine parent welcomes us home with the same gifts. It's important to remember that the prodigal son learned from his mistakes. He acted foolishly. He squandered his inheritance. He went through some tough times, but he learned. And he chose to go home to his father. You and I can learn from our mistakes too. We can come to understand, I believe, that there really are no mistakes. There are some hard lessons, and we learn a lot in those, but there are no mistakes. We can come to know that out of every experience, that by turning back to God, we can heal ourselves. But let's not forget the third person in the story, the elder brother, who represents our sometimes overactive ego. We turn toward home, we're feeling good about the acceptance we have been given, and then the ego speaks. Have you ever berated yourself for making mistakes? Have you ever condemned yourself and felt unworthy or undeserving of your good? If you have, then you have been the elder brother in this parable. We have all played both roles at one time or another. We have all squandered our time, our talents, and our treasures searching out there in the far country. We have all fallen off the path, looked outside of ourselves for our good, and then realizing that there was a downward spiral happening, we have come back to ourselves, just like the prodigal son did. We have gone home to God. We checked in. We have all acted as our own judge, jury, and executioner, as the elder brother did. We have all succumbed to that committee that lives in our head, the ego that says, wow, you really messed that up. No one's ever going to trust you or love you again. The parable beautifully illustrates God's love for us. It reminds us that no matter what we have ever thought, ever said, or ever done, God's love for us is compassionate, kind, forgiving, joyful, celebratory, and unchanging, and ever ready to receive us back into the fold. I think that where we struggle is believing that we are truly beloved children of a loving God. We struggle with believing that we are deserving of receiving good from our divine parent. We find ourselves locked in a prison of limitation that we created in our own minds. There is a wonderful story of Harry Houdini, who was a famous musician and a very arrogant individual. A certain amount of confidence is needed, of course, to do the things that a musician does. So up to a point, the confidence and the arrogance served Harry Houdini well. But in this particular story, it did not. He had bragged often that I'm so great I can escape from any jail I am locked into. Any jail. It doesn't matter. Lock me in any jail and I will escape. And he did, time and time again. He was very successful in escaping from these jail cells until one particular jail cell seemed a little different than all the others. He was put into a cell and the door slammed behind him. And he quickly took from his belt a very long, flexible wire. It was very strong, and he always successfully used it before to pick the locks. That was his trick. But in this particular incident, the lock was different. The door was not opening, and the great Houdini was quickly getting more and more frustrated. The clock was ticking, his ego was kicking in, and he was getting worried that maybe he wasn't going to get out of this jail cell. So in frustration, he wiped the sweat from his head, leaned back against the door, and as he did, it swung open. All the while, it had never been locked, only closed. He had been free the whole time. And isn't that true of me and you as well? We work, we struggle, we sweat, we worry. We fight to free ourselves from someone or something only to discover that we were always free. All we need to do is stop as the prodigal son did, prayerfully assess our situation, take a deep breath and head for home. Walk out the unlocked door of the jail cell we have created and go home to God. We know, don't we, that with God, all things are possible. God's love and God's grace invite us home, welcome us in as honored guests, and unfold us in love. Emmett Fox said the difference between success and failure is action. Those who fail often are found standing by the side of the road, moaning about their fate, immobilized by their situation. The prodigal son took action. He looked at where he was, he hated what he saw, accepted the divine idea of returning home to his dad, and he was propelled into action. He headed home to his father. When we begin to fully accept that we do live in our Father, Mother, God's house, and all that our divine parent has is ours, then we have begun to awaken to the truth of our being. We have begun to awaken to our place in the universe and our place in God's heart. Soon we will be approaching the birth of the Christ. Birthing the Christ in our own hearts leads us to a state of grace and leads us to an awareness of the powerful, unstoppable outpouring of good God has for all that has been created. I invite you to make the choice to believe that you are a child of God, that you were given the gift of grace at birth, and that you are truly worthy and deserving of all God's goodness. It's true. In the song Amazing Grace, we hear the words, "How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed." I invite you to believe that you are worthy of amazing grace because you are an amazing child of God. Grace is yours, and so it is. Next week, we have the conclusion to our quest journey, and we'll do a summary of that. And until then, know if you are finding clarity with help from Unity of Springfield, please consider giving to keep our messages alive. We are out there everywhere in the universe right now, YouTube and Facebook and our website. And there are plenty of ways to give. So I invite you to take your imaginary offertory in your hand, unless you do have your gift ready and you plan to bring it this afternoon and drop it off. That would be great. We just take these gifts in our hands, we infuse them with our love. And we know that divine love through us blesses and multiplies all that we have, all that we give, and all that we receive, and all really is well. And so it is. Amen. Special thanks this morning to Chris Farishon for creating the beautiful holiday layout for our PowerPoint presentation. Yay, Chris, thank you. We'd like a little variety. And our garden angels. Several weeks ago, Shelly, Bill Shepard, Ron, and Criselli all went to our backyard and cleaned up some of the leaves and debris that we had out there. And special shout out to you. Thank you also for doing that sacred work. And our prayer for protection this morning, if you'd like to join me. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well.